Hello, our friends, Evolutionary Energy Arts family.
We are back.
We are back, and we're going to be talking about a fun subject, which is Rahu and Ketu, which is a very, very unique aspect of Vedic astrology and kind of fascinating.
Well, yeah, it's a unique aspect. It's a very important aspect. So these aren't necessarily planets. These are nodes of the moon, and their planetary influences, and very, very important in one's chart.
Yeah, and this is fascinating stuff. Just to give a brief overview, the way I view it is that when we look at astrology, we're actually looking at kind of the programming of the universe. Now what we know is that many scientists are coming to the realization of what we've known in the East and in the mystery traditions, that this is basically a holographic three-dimensional representation of a reality that is all a construct of the mind. As we know, everything is quantum fields, and they just are kind of there. They take shape when they are observed. So in that sense, we are creating our reality as we go. And this is just part of what we're learning about. And we see how there is the as above, so below effect as well. So we see the same sort of structures in the body that we see in the universe itself. And when we look at a brain cell, we look at the universe, they're very, very similar. Again, there's a fractal nature going on in this holographic universe. So how do we understand it better, and how do we understand how we can perhaps, have a smoother, better life and take advantage of the, computer programming? Well, Rahu and Ketu is an interesting story. This story is told in the ancient Puranic texts of a time before creation of this world. After a long and horrible war, the gods and the demons cooperated to churn the galactic material called the Milk Ocean. Well, this gets you thinking about the Milky Way and making the galaxy itself, and so, even before humanity, there were these quote-unquote wars of the gods and the demons. And in the Vedic texts, that's the Devas and the Asuras. So the Devas are beings that you probably would recognize, like Vishnu and Shiva, Lakshmi, Parvati, Sarasvati, etc., etc. And then there's many different demons as well on the other side. And there's this war, and we could also view it as a war of yin and yang in so many ways as well, as above, so below. So it's really, really interesting to see they're churning this galactic material, the Milk Ocean. This activity created Amrita, which is a nectar of immortality, intended only for the gods. One of the demons, however, sitting between the sun and the moon, managed to take a sip. And, this is all just like so fascinating because, again, it's allegory. It doesn't necessarily mean this is exactly what happened. We're to look deeper. It's the same thing with the biblical stories. Why teach in parables? Well, so the masses can understand it. So we're, trying to humanize things, trying to humanize the laws of the universe so people could understand it a little bit better, maybe get a little bit of a grasp on something that would be too technical for many people. So one of the demons sitting between the sun and the moon managed to take a sip. Lord Vishnu, as we see here, the sustainer of the universe, quickly decapitated him with his chakra. Interesting, he has this discus that is a weapon, but it's also a chakra. Isn't that curious as well? Rahu is the head of the serpent demon without the body. Ketu is the tail without the head. As they were now immortal, Lord Vishnu needed to find a spot for them, so he placed them in two specific points in the sky. By eclipsing the sun and moon twice a year, they can create confusion and exact revenge. The misunderstanding of our true nature allows us to exist under the illusion that we are separate from universal law of creation. According to Vedic wisdom, each planet is an expression of our own divine consciousness, so we get to understand ourselves through the planets. And again, this is as above, so below. The nodes bring together Earth, Sun, and Moon, which can also be thought of as body, soul, and mind, making them the most influential in astrology. And this is, again, something that is not understood by people that are really looking only at the Western astrology. In the planetary cabinet, Rahu is the advancing army. He has a voracious appetite without, however, the ability to digest. He is responsible for obsessions and desires that push us to our limits. Wherever Rahu is, there is inexperience. Ketu is the occupying army. He governs things we have learned very well. He withdraws and leads us out. He can confer contempt or wisdom, then non-attachment, and ultimately moksha or liberation. In an individual birth chart or by transit in the sky, the Rahu-Ketu axis tells us what we absolutely must do so that we may be freed from worldly desire. Interesting stuff. This is really fascinating. Again, allegory. Did this event actually happen? Well, perhaps in one way or another. It's about the moon. It's about the moon. And, of course, the moon rules our emotions. It pulls and tugs on us. It has a gravitational effect on us as we are, well, if you're a little baby, you're about 85% water. If you're a grown adult, probably somewhere in the 70% of your body is water. We kind of dry up as we get older, and then that's why we get stiffer. So Rahu and Ketu, very, very interesting. The other thing that you notice is the snake-like tail. And like the first picture we were looking at, again, they're represented a lot, often by the Nagas. And the Nagas, again, are a reptilian type of energy. You could equate it to the dragon energy, which can be, basically represented as wisdom, yet perceived with caution.
Absolutely. These are two entities that you want to see where they're at in your chart so that you can basically help manage your life a little bit better, because depending on where they're at and who they're sitting with, you proceed in different ways. It's really curious how they do kind of rule a chart in many ways.
So it's all about positioning and the ecliptic plane, the plane of Earth's orbit around the sun. Nodes are the points where the moon's orbit crosses the ecliptic plane. And again, everything is consciousness. Everything you see in the sky, every single star is a being. Every planet is a being. Everything is consciousness. It's everywhere. If you're able to see the life force, you will see the life force around inanimate objects, because it's all still the same material. And so everything has an influence and effect on everything else, being that everything is consciousness.
It really is. So, I look at astrology as kind of like a life map. It gives you an idea of where you've been and where you need to go. So there's a lot of questions that can be answered, just by looking at Rahu and Ketu. Really, there's a lot there that can be discovered and uncovered to help one through their life.
So, tell us more about like Rahu, for instance. As I know, a lot of the Vedic astrologers, they seem to be they can be almost all consumed when they start talking about Rahu and Ketu as to the importance of them. And, it's so interesting in Western astrology. It's like most people probably just simply glance at their sun sign and just look at their daily sun sign and think, okay, that's it. I mean, that's like not even 1/1000th of what we should be looking at. Again, it's kind of what we have in the Western systems. It almost feels like they've been made on purpose to kind of distort things for the masses and keep the secrets to the elites.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's what I feel. And when you're looking at Rahu, depending on where Rahu is sitting, Rahu wants more of whatever house he's sitting in. And a lot of times Rahu can take on the planetary influence with the planet he's sitting with. So Rahu is very greedy. Rahu is the one who wants, more money, more this, more that. And he's insatiable. He just can't get enough. And this is where you'd want to look at look at it where it is in your chart and say, okay, well, this is a warning. I better be careful here.
Okay, so taking my chart, just because I know you're familiar with that. So where is my Rahu and how does that affect me?
Actually, your Rahu is really unique because it's sitting with Jupiter, and Jupiter is the only planet that can actually control Rahu's desires. So you're sitting in the fifth house, which is your higher learning, higher wisdom, sitting with Jupiter. So with you, you're going to want to learn more and more and more, everything there is to know about higher wisdom, higher knowledge, and that is you. You know, you can't get enough. You just eat these books up like crazy. But there is always going to be something in your life that kind of holds you stable, and that's the Jupiterian influence for you. So it's actually to your benefit, which is really rare.
Yeah, and that is exactly me, you know, because as I've shared with you guys, like at 5 years old, when my brother passed on, then I had to learn all about the other side. And so, you know, the only books that we had that I saw at that time that were in the house was a Catholic missal and the Bible. So at 5 years old, I wasn't able to read it. So I had a neighbor that was an 8-year-old, and I gave it to her, and she read to me all the time. And you know, I wanted to know all the stories. And I remember at 5 years old being mesmerized by the Passion of Christ and everything. And then when I was 11, you know, I read the Bible cover to cover, every single word. I was like, I'm going to read this whole thing on my own, you know, because we were going to a Catholic church. And so you get little snippets, and that's it. And I wanted more. And, you know, at every almanac, because my mom was a historian, basically, every almanac, every history book that she had, as soon as I was able to read, I was reading them. And it was absolutely insatiable, and still is. You know, in my lifetime, I probably read hundreds of thousands of books, you know, so it's exactly right. I could feel that influence. It's a total insatiable quest for knowledge.
It is. And, you know, depending again where Rahu is sitting, that can be, and who Rahu is sitting with, you know, it's a good idea to be kind of forewarned to know that, okay, this could be a problem for me. And that's something I tell people too when I run across it, like this is something you might want to watch out for. So yeah, I mean, it's just a very important influence.
It's really fascinating. Now Jupiter, and we'll get more into the planets, but you have said that Jupiter is kind of like a Christ-like energy.
Oh yeah, Jupiter is all your higher wisdom. A lot of people look at Jupiter as like the Christ energy, the Christ vibration, you know, so to speak, or, you know, the second coming. Jupiter is all about that higher knowledge, higher wisdom. And you have all of these influences in the fifth house, which again is your higher knowledge, wisdom, teachers, gurus. And you can't get enough of it. It's insatiable. But again, Jupiter stabilizes you so that at least you're in one spot and you're able to take the information in instead of chasing everything all over the place, all over the planet, because you can't get enough knowledge. You know, Jupiter holds you stable so you can take it in.
Does Jupiter have an effect on intention then?
Oh yeah, huge effect on intention. Jupiter is, I love Jupiter. Jupiter is expansion. So again, wherever Jupiter sits, that house, there's going to be expansion for wisdom and knowledge, and you do that too.
And so Ketu is, give us some descriptions on Ketu.
Okay, Ketu is isolation. Ketu is spirituality. Ketu, wherever Ketu sits, that's what you've already done in your past life. So wherever Ketu sits, it's either going to block that from coming to you, or you're just not going to care about it.
Okay. And so, you know, just because you're familiar with mine, so where is my Ketu?
Your Ketu is in the 11th house, and that's your house of hopes, dreams, wishes, all of these things. Fame, stuff like that. So because Ketu is sitting there, that is an indicator these are all things you've already have. You've already had the fame, you've already had the money, you've already had these things. So you're just not going to care about it. If you do get it, it's not going to be any big deal to you. You don't care.
Which is, you know, exactly the case, and that's why I have not like prioritized it, and that's why, you know, we go along on a donations basis. Just recognizing that, you know, the system is something that needs to be changed. It's fascinating how this works out, and how this is the programming of the universe. As a kid, we used to play Dungeons and Dragons. And like when you create a being to play in that game, you know, you're going to take on this persona, you're going to have an avatar, a character that you're going to play as. You're given so many, I think we used to call them hit points. So you're given like 100 points for the character. And you could spread it out amongst different abilities, characteristics, so to speak. And I forget how many there were, but if there were 12, you know, including things like dexterity, intelligence, strength, endurance, etc., etc., you only have so many points, so you have to make your choices. You know, some people might want their character to be super strong, so 25 points go to strength, and then you know, maybe he's not as smart. Maybe he doesn't make the best choices. When we come into the body, our higher selves are looking at all these things. They're looking at all these things, and they know what they want to achieve. They know what they want to learn. And so, and also, they're looking at DNA lineage and deciding, you know, what people would be good parents to give me a certain situation. Like my parents, you know, they lived paycheck to paycheck all their life. They never had any savings ever. In their entire lives. And so for me, not really caring about the monetary side of things, that makes perfect sense why I kind of chose them in that way, because they were very loving and peaceful. They never fought. They never fought. In their entire marriage, I think that they were married like 40-something years before my dad passed. They never fought once. I never saw them fight. So I had a lot of stability, but we were poor. But that was okay because that gave me what I needed.
Exactly. And that's kind of how things happen. You're put in certain situations, whether you realize it or not, for certain things to unfold in your life. And a lot of people get scared when they hear about Ketu. Like for you, people think, well, if Ketu is in my 11th house, I'm going to be cut off from all of these riches. I'm going to be cut off from all this fame. No, not necessarily. Not necessarily. You know, it just means that if it does come across, you're just not going to care about it. And that's okay.
Yeah, exactly. It shows your tendencies. So understanding our tendencies and why they are what they are, then we could actually, you know, in some cases, we can override the program. We can go ahead, understand, okay, I have a natural tendency for this. I understand why it's there. But you know what? At this point in time, I need to override that. So we can override that in certain ways, understanding our tendencies. We could put more of a focus in. And we could even do things like create our own affirmations or use certain mantras to overcome certain certain programming of the Matrix, which we chose to jump into. This is one of the other things as well. Instead of having that like victimhood and just, you know, because there were times in the past, you know, where I grew frustrated, you know, with my parents' situation. And, you know, the tendency, like I've had so many resets in my life where I went back to zero. And even going back like 10 years ago, and basically, you know, not even if I didn't have a job that I was working that allowed me to work on premises, then theoretically I would have been kind of homeless living out of my car by choice, because I also knew certain situations were not in my greater good, and I knew that I was just starting to get on my path in life, because I did have a purpose, but it took me many years, 40-something years, to figure out my purpose. And that is the case with a lot of people as well. And we could swim upstream all we want. Swimming upstream can be very difficult, very exhausting, but when we understand ourselves and start to swim with the current, then we can achieve amazing things.
Well, yeah, you know, I mean, there's a specific conjunction in someone's chart that can cause like excessive fear and illusions. And if one has that in their chart and they learn about it in astrology, they're able to let go of that feeling that, okay, this is going to hurt me. It truly is an illusion. So as far as a therapy point of view, it really helps, because I do have Saturn sitting with Ketu, and that can create excessive fear. And when I found out I had that, I was able to let it go. I was like, okay, that's written in the stars. I know what it is. I can let it go now.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a ritual that was devised by a group that was known as the Golden Dawn, and I've talked about them a little bit. And the lesser banishing ritual of the hexagram is a ritual that I've covered too. It's in one of our playlists there. It's a ritual that negates planetary aspects when done on a regular basis. Interesting, because when we get to the core of the Western mystery tradition, it's all about astrology. First and foremost, everything is when anything that you get into, as far as these mystery traditions, there is a huge core that's about astrology and the programming of the universe.
Right. It is. It is very, very important to know. And I feel like in many ways they've taken this science away from us or made us fear it, because if we were to truly, truly understand it, we would have such a wonderful roadmap on our, in our lives, and we would have so many less problems. The only problem with, Vedic astrology is it's piecemealed together. There's nothing that's super, super complete. So we're stuck with having to gather all of this information and put it together ourselves and, work with it the best we can. But in my experience, for the most part, the charts that I do does give people a lot of understanding and help.
Now, Rahu and Ketu are always positioned in a certain aspect to each other, so many houses apart, right?
7, yeah.
So that's interesting in and of itself. It's an axis. And, that has a huge influence on exactly who we are. Gets me thinking of the Taiji pole, which is this energetic axis point, goes straight through the spinal cord, or right through the center point of our body, from which all of the chakras are on, and extends into the earth, extends up into the heavens. In some ways, I could see Rahu and Ketu in a light very, very similar to that.
Right. You can look at this and see where they're at in someone's chart, and that kind of gives you an idea where to put the wind in the sail, because, Rahu is a very malefic planet and can cause a lot of harm. But if you know how to direct the energy, you're okay.
And I find that fascinating as well, because Rahu and Ketu then are basically, they're thought to be an asura split in half, which is like a demon, quote unquote. And it's associated with the moon, and the moon, again, we have all these legends that say the moon was brought here, perhaps by the Anunnaki, perhaps under draconian authority, to influence us as well. So that's just fascinating in and of itself.
Well, yeah, because I honestly feel if you were to take the moon away, you would have so many less problems, because the moon is the mind wherever it sits in the chart. There's going to be ebb and flows and ups and downs and sudden change, and that's because of the moon or the mind. So I sometimes I think it's just a big spaceship.
Yeah, exactly. Exerting influence on us. And again, part of this matrix, this control grid, because there is the matrix of the entire universe. And this is where I differ with some people, like, say, a David Icke, who views all of this as just always being bad, bad, evil. I do think that our planet is under malefic forces, for sure. But I don't think it's the natural order of things. I don't think it's the same in perhaps other galaxies, even in other universes of this density. I think it's just, where we are, and also where we're going. We're going into a place where it's going to be a lot more benevolent. And, Peter Dinov talked about that as well, and we've talked about him. And we've actually been able to channel him a couple of times, and we probably could reach out to him and channel more, which we should. We have a lot of these beings that Cindy's able to connect with. Cindy actually connected with some really interesting beings that we haven't even shared yet with you guys. And we're going to go deep into that as well. So when you know this matrix, then you can navigate the matrix much easier.
It does make life easier. You know, when I learned just my nakshatra, what my nakshatra was, and I got a reading only on the nakshatra alone, that answered so many questions for me, and I was able to put so many things to rest. And I'm not quite sure I understand why it is that I just let everything go, but it happened, and that's why I had to learn more how to read the charts and help other people too.
Yep. And now I'm learning with you, and I'm finding that it is illuminating. And I should have learned all this decades ago. I really should have. When it came to the astrological part, I would just kind of glance over, gloss over, skim over in the books I was studying, because it just seemed to get so deep and confusing, and so much of actual work, you know. But it's worth it. It is worth it, because again, it's understanding the matrix that we're in and the totality. So what it's done for me is it's really put a lot of these different puzzle pieces together on why things are the way they are. And yeah, it's really given me a ton of clarity.
Yeah, it does. You know, it's just a little bit overwhelming when you first look at it and you see all these different layers of information and how they kind of have to go together and mold and meld together, and you know, the degrees and so many different things you have to put together. That part, yeah, is scary and overwhelming, you know, but once you start to get the fabric of that down, then things start to clip into place. And it is really nice to have you working with me, because we can kind of drill each other a little bit. You know, it's great in a nice way. You know, what does this mean? Well, babe, I forgot what that means, and you tell me or I tell you, and it just works.
Right. And since, you know, I have a lot of these stories that I've got memorized in my memory banks here, then things click a lot better for me, as well as comparing it to other systems and traditions, and seeing like a deeper picture. So again, just to give you guys a little bit of a recap, these are the two nodes of the moon, and they're also represented as basically a demonic entity that has been decapitated, and one part's the head, Rahu, and one part's the tail, Ketu. Interesting too, again, represented usually as a naga, which again, nagas are these serpent-like beings, these reptilian serpent-like beings, which are legendary, supposedly. Yet there's lots of stories, and I've done a video on the Nagas, which I should probably redo a new one. You know, they're inner earth beings as well, and even in the seas. And there are people over in India, on the eastern part of India, close to Bangladesh, that are known as the Nagas, that claim lineage also to these beings, which again, the Devas are the gods, basically, and the Asuras are the demons. There was a Naga land that went under the sea as well, which, you know, some have equated to Lemuria, perhaps. It's fascinating how all this is interconnected. It is really fascinating, the representations that we see. It's all part of this divine matrix that we find ourselves in. So, yeah, Rahu and Ketu, fascinating subject. There's Vedic astrology, fascinating subject. And so we want to thank you guys for being part of this family. Make sure you are subscribed. Anybody that wants to get their Vedic chart done, just send us your place, time. Time is critical. So if you don't know your time, you know, if you think it's 8 o'clock, but it might be 9 o'clock, well, maybe it was AM or maybe it was PM, everything's going to be off for the most part. There's only very few things that will be on if you just know the date. So many things are always shifting. This whole matrix, think about all the stars in constant motion. You know, when we do meditation at night, I'm sitting in one spot and I'm noticing a particular star. And then when we're done, I can't see it anymore because the window is 18 inches and it's moved already that much, you know, in whatever, 45 minutes, it's moved out of view. So it's constantly changing. So we have to know the time, which is on most birth certificates. So again, time, place, and date of birth. Just send that energy to EEARTS, that energy, that info. And it is energy. To EEARTS at protonmail.com, evolutionaryenergyarts@gmail.com, and along with your name. And Cindy will do up a chart for you. It typically takes her about 2 to 3 hours of research to put a chart together. And then we usually take, you know, anywhere from a half hour to an hour to go over the chart. with the individual. So basically it's a good 3 to 4 hours worth of work. And, most Vedic astrologers really charge hundreds of dollars to do a chart, but we want to do things on a donation basis, and we want to make it affordable for you guys, for those that can. So, we appreciate donations which go through our Ko-Fi account and keep us doing this. And again, we want to do what we can for as many people as we can, and share this knowledge. But, we are also in the Matrix, unfortunately, right now with this Babylonian money magic system that hopefully will go sometime in the future. So, guys, as always, God bless. Stay safe. Namaste.
Namaste.